Hello, I'm Sandra Lilly. I'm editor of NBC Latino, the English language section of NBCnews.com, focusing on news and information for and by the millions of Latinos that are in the US and Latin America. And I am so thrilled to be here. It's an honor to be here and to host a conversation in celebration of the reopening of the modernized Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library in Washington, D.C. And I'm excited to take part in this celebration because it is DC Central Library and also the location for conversations on race and identity that are so important in this nation always, especially this year, but always. And for me, it's just such an honor to be able to talk and present with my friend, a fellow journalist, and literally, really a pioneer in journalism. As someone who's in the business, I can say that many of us work in this business, but not all of us are true pioneers that have carved paths in some of the major news organizations in the country. And Maria Hinojosa is also an author. And so we are going to have a lot of fun, but also we're going to have a meaningful conversation about her new book, Once I Was You, a memoir of love and hate in a torn America. And I cannot say enough nice things about it. I really loved it. I was telling you earlier before we started taping and having this conversation with our fellow bookworms, that you did something that is remarkable, and that is that you were able to weave a book that has so many levels. It's a book about being female. It's a book about immigrating with your family from Mexico to the US. It's a book about being a nerd and going to a good school and finding your intellectual self, which really defined you at a very early age in terms of your profession. But then what you took all that, and you also talk about very tough experiences in your life. And then you wove in there our history and unfortunately the evolution of immigration in this country, and how we went from a certain way of seeing immigrants to now a criminalization of immigration. And you did that beautifully, and the two strands really do work together. And I'm curious as to how that happened, whether it happened naturally and then you thought of writing this book, or when you thought, I'd like to write a book, you started thinking and you did this, and boom, you put it together.
No, not at all. It was not like, first of all, it's great to be here at the Martin Luther King Memorial Library in DC. I'm so excited. Thank you for having me. And thank you for sponsoring this conversation between two Latina journalists who are nerdy, political nerds, journalistic nerds, but we love to have these kinds of conversations and include people. So thank you so much. It's really special for me to be here, and promise to do it in person as soon as I can. So no, the honest truth, Sandra, is that, as a journalist who is working on daily, weekly, monthly deadlines, the notion of writing a book was not really not what I necessarily wanted to do. Actually, you'll remember this because I think you were a part of it when I went on MSNBC in 2016, and I had a moment with Steve Cortez, who represents basically as a surrogate for Donald Trump, and he used the term illegals, an illegal immigrant, and I kind of copped an attitude, and I was like, don't ever use the term illegal to describe a human being. Illegal is not a noun. And I said to him, the first thing the Nazis did was to declare the Jews to be an illegal people. Elie Wiesel taught me that. That's why we don't use this term. That went viral, as you know. Fuse, Univision got it, made it. It went viral. It was seen by millions. I don't know when was the last count, but over 10 million people. And so the thought was, oh, well, you know what? I'll write a little book. I'll write a little book because I'm too busy to write a big book, but I'll write a little book, like the kind that you get at the airport, little pocket book, like Chimamanda Adichie, we are all feminists. And in that process, I had to get a new agent. Mine has retired. We had to actually talk to publishers, whatever. It became clear that they actually didn't want a little book from me. They wanted a bigger book. So now I was kind of in it. And I have to say, my editor, Mexican, Irish, Michelle Herrera Mulligan from Chicago, who's a great Latina editor known in the business, used to edit Cosmo for Latinas, so very well known. She was the one who said, Maria, we want a big book. And I was like, no, I know you want a big book, so I'm going to write a lot. She was like, no, we are expecting a big book from you. And I was like, what does that mean? She's like, it has to be substantial. And so you are. She was the one who said, you're going to put the history there. And I was like, what? No! I was so scared. I was so scared because I was like, oh my God, I'm not a historian. But it was such an important part of the work because just to answer your question, finally, what ended up happening is once we decided on a kind of structure that we needed to write an outline, a deep outline, I started working with my personal editor, Katie Salisbury. And in order to start working on the outline, the first issue that we looked at, you're going to love this, through my life, news events. What were the news events that you remember through your life? So we didn't start, I didn't start conceiving of Once I Was You actually in a personal way. It was more like, okay, what was the first news event that I remember seeing?
Interesting.
Then we did all of that. Then we did now let's talk about the history, and we intersected all of that. And then we were adding the history like spinach, it's like you're something that you need to eat. It's really healthy for you. And you don't even realize how good it is because it's like perfectly made spinach with like olive oil and garlic. That's the way the history is interspersed so that you're like, oh my God, it tastes so good to be reading this history. I don't even realize how good it is for me. That's the story of the book.
Maria, I want you to read an excerpt of your book that frankly is sort of chilling, because what readers have to understand is that when you came to this country with your family, your dad was a professional, a PhD, amazing in his field. And, then something happens at an airport that frankly is not something that you are expecting from the children and the wife of a professional who was working at one of the major universities in the country, the University of Chicago. So tell us a little bit about what happened, and please read that part of your book. Do us the honor.
So, so basically, the message to each of you is to try to get your family to tell you the stories of your own arrival, whatever that arrival looks like. Maybe you were born here, but what is the backstory? And the backstory that I had understood was that something had happened when we arrived by plane with green cards, my mother and the 4 kids. We were on our way to meet my father, who was a medical doctor dedicated to research based at the University of Chicago that had recruited him. And so at this point in the story, we had just flown in from Mexico City. We're in the airport in Dallas where we were going to change planes, and we're going through the immigration checkpoint in the airport. And something happens with this agent where basically, he is now searching our bodies. He's like looking, what is it? Is he just trying to match our face with our green card or what? And then the agent then turned to me. His eyes combed over every inch of my tiny body. And Berta, my mom, pulled me even closer. I was a baby. He was fixated on a small reddish patch of skin on my arm where a rash had developed from the substitute blanket that I had been using the last weeks at home. It was a minor allergic reaction to the wool from the Mexican highlands. The immigration agent looked at me, then turned to my mom and shook his head. Ma'am, your baby looks like she has the German measles, he said in a thick Texas accent, which is contagious. So we're going to have to put her in quarantine. The rest of you are okay to come in with your green cards, but the little baby girl here, we're going to have to put her in quarantine and keep her. For my mom, those 2 words sent her reeling. Keep her? Her knees almost buckled, and she felt the urge to run away as fast as she could. How could she be feeling both impulses at once? She had to force herself to take control of the situation. This man wanted to take away her chicle. That's her nickname for me. Berta had never before been told that someone was going to keep one of her children. Her heart was beating so fast, it felt like she had a hummingbird in her chest. She wanted to unleash a blood-curdling scream right then and there. It felt like someone had just sliced her open, reached in, tried to rip out her heart like in one of the sacrificios de los Aztecas. I'm going to flip the page so I don't read too much, but this is my mother's response when she realized she had no one around and all she had was her voice. She started screaming to the agent, "Under no circumstances will I allow you to keep my child behind. And our paperwork is all in order, sir. And I know we have the right to come into this country, sir," my mother said. And in that moment, the sexy, dainty mom in kitten heels transformed into a monster twice the size of the agent. With a powerful voice, she yelled up at the man who looked like a tree and said firmly in her thick, unmistakably Mexican accent, "I am coming into this country, sir, with all 4 of my children. Sir, do you hear me, sir? You cannot keep my child, sir. Do you hear me, sir?" And then it ends with the immigration agent saying, "Why, yes, ma'am, correct. You may all come into the United States of America. Welcome. Come on in." Because at that point, my mother had created a scene of chaos by yelling at the immigration agent. And I think that is what he didn't know what to do but to let us all come in.
You know, it's that scene is it was terrifying. As a mother, it's like the worst nightmare. It's terrifying. At the same time, it was funny when you always mention about your mom being petite and him being so tall. But more than anything, it's just emblematic, I think, of the vulnerability, right, that immigrants have in this country. And I'd like to I myself have a little part of your book that from the end, which I think is so important. And then we'll go back and sort of talk about how you did this together, these 2 strands of your personal life and immigration. Because after you read your book, and even someone in the business, in the news business, learned a lot by the way you just connected all the dots on immigration. You say, doing something about this means opening your eyes and asking questions and understanding that people are being denied basic due process on a daily basis. No phone call, no Miranda rights, no lawyer, no date by which they must be released. Change starts with knowledge. Thousands of children are being held and sent across state lines with strangers. People in your own communities are making money off of immigrant detention. Universities are invested in private prisons. Women and men are being held in concentration camps with no legally binding standard for how they should be taken care of. So you sort of go with what happened to you, and then you go all the way through your life, sort of takes you in this journey, and you sort of witness this. How have you seen, obviously the Cliff Notes version for our fellow bookworms, but how would you tell someone that doesn't know a lot about immigration, how you've seen it changed throughout your career as a journalist?
Well, I mean, it definitely has changed, but I guess the bigger kind of revelation for me, Sandra, and it was hard, right? Because we really have great expectations for this country, which now is our country. Just kind of like, oh, espérate un segundo. So wait, there's the narrative that we're pro-immigrant, but actually, historically, that's not it at all. In fact, the first people who were excluded by law from entering the United States, so not deported, but excluded, were Chinese women, Asian women. In the history books, they are written about as if they were what we say sex workers, prostitutes. And that's why they didn't allow the women in first? No. They were the wives of the men that had come from China and other parts of Asia to build the railroad. So then you're like, wait a second, but the Statue of Liberty, yes, the Statue of Liberty. But sadly, it is a narrative. Whether or not we decide to make that narrative real really depends on us. And that, I think, is part of the message of the book. It's like, it's not somebody else who's going to determine whether or not this country is open to immigrants or not. It's us. It's in everything that we do. So, from the time that I was born and brought to this country, I think immigrants at that point, well, one, we were being recruited. My father was being recruited to come here. He was a professional, brilliant medical doctor who helped to create the cochlear implant. But workers were being recruited as well. And so we were, I would say, pretty much invisible. Like in the south side of Chicago, at the University of Chicago, like not a big deal, not a lot of attention placed. Even in the Mexican community in Chicago, it was like it's there. Mostly we were invisible. Not a threat, invisible. Mm-hmm. Now we remain invisible in terms of our humanity, in terms of the complexity of our stories, in terms of who we are, everything that we represent. We remain invisible in that sense, but we have become visibly targeted and put into a box that now is reduced to you're a criminal, you're trying to cross over the wall, you're going to take our jobs, take our language, now actually, bring socialism. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, even though she is Puerto Rican, but now suddenly Latinos and Latinas all are seen through the prism of, well, but you're an immigrant. It's like, no, actually, no, that is not. That is part of what we've been saying, is that the complexity of the Latino experience is that it is not just one. The growth from 2000 to 2010 in Latino population, as per the census, 2000 to 2010, our population grew by 43%. And the majority of that growth was not from immigration, it was from births.
Right.
So now all of us, and that's why I'm so honored to be here and to be having this conversation, because now we not only have to make ourselves visible in all of our humanity, but now we also have to deconstruct the narrative that has been created. We have to deconstruct it. We have to create a whole new narrative that many of us have been trying, you, Sandra, myself, but we are small within the context of the larger mainstream media. And basically, a lot of the people who are running that mainstream media have grown up with the same misunderstandings about immigrants. Mm-hmm. So this is a plea for those of you who are thinking, or you're a student, or you want to become a journalist, please do. We need you. We need you with all of your diversity in America's newsrooms.
And that's the perfect segue for sort of the other part of your book that I want to highlight, and that is that you do a beautiful job of sort of telling us about your personal and professional journey. And let's talk first about the professional one, which is fascinating because, I got tired just reading it about how hard you worked. I mean, you really didn't stop. And what was really fun for me is to see how it started in college, really, when you had that amazing radio program from the get-go that was quite known in New York City, and not only in New York City, but around, and you had like all these intellectuals, and you dealt with everything that happened in the 1980s with Central America. And at the same time, you were showcasing all the wonderful, you talked about some of the singers that I grew up with in college. I was like, oh my goodness. But apart from all that, you really, really worked your tushy off to get into our most incredible journalistic institutions, National Public Radio, CBS, CNN, and you're, very no holds barred about the fact that you had to fight your way in, and that there were some hilarious instances. You mentioned something that happened in an elevator. You're wearing an amazing necklace that I guess if you were Nordic looking and you wore, it would just be like, oh, cool necklace. In your case, you were called tribal, which I thought was wild. But in all seriousness, you really did break barriers, but it came with challenges. And just in terms of, you give us a lot of different instances in the book, but when you talk to people now that your book has been out for a few months, which are the ones that people sort of refer you to, or which are the ones that you think about the most as you relay your book?
In terms of the journalism part of it?
Yes.
People love the Walter Cronkite story.
That was awesome. Tell my fellow bookers about it.
You know what? I'm so happy I decided to write about it, because I didn't realize that it would. And it's and the thing is like, it's true. And people are like, wait, you're kidding. It's like, no, I actually worked for Walter Cronkite. So early on in the book, there's a moment when I kind of realized, as I was writing, I was like, as I thinking about the news events, I was like, wow, the first time I saw a man cry was Walter Cronkite on television when he was reporting about John F. Kennedy. I was with my mom. That image of Walter Cronkite crying in tears, and then of course, essentially consuming journalism, but never seeing myself or my family there for, the entirety of my life until I get to CBS, and now I had become a journalist. I was the first one at NPR. Now I was at CBS, and I was producing the end of the year radio special that Walter Cronkite used to do for every year. It was called Where We Stand with Walter Cronkite. And I had to write the end of the year commentary. The year was 1987. It was the year of Iran-Contra. It was the year in which this country, there were lies that Ronald Reagan was perpetrating. It was another one of these aha moments of like, holy my God, there's so much corruption. Oliver North was there, you know, a decorated Marine who is now, you know, selling arms for profit, getting money to the counter-revolutionaries, and he got out. It was a mess. And I wrote an essay. I was very scared. I wrote about the imposter syndrome, not being able to actually sit down and write this essay because I had to write for Walter Cronkite. And then finally just forcing myself and I actually found one of the old legal pads that I had saved, you know, writing it down and then, you know, finally actually editing it with some of my fellow journalists so that it was tight, and taking it to my boss, Norman, who said, yeah, no, Walter Cronkite won't read this. It's written from your perspective as a young Latina. And I was like, no, it's not. And I insisted. I had one of those moments where I was able to stand up for myself. And I said, let's take it down to the evening news, the CBS evening news editor, and have him read it. And don't tell him I wrote it.
That was my favorite part. That was genius that you thought of that. Like, that was just like, I was like, wow, you go, Maria.
You know what I think, Sandra? I think in those moments, I believe that there are madrinas and padrinos of journalism, whether it's Ida B. Wells or Frederick Douglass or any of the great journalist heroes, Jovita, who see us and they're like, we're going to throw this one to you. Because I don't even know how I thought of that. I was like, let's take it down and don't tell him I wrote it. I'm going to come with you, but he'll think I'm an assistant. And he read it. And he said, no, this is good. Walter will read it. It's good. Change this one word. Oh my God.
That was almost cinematic, honestly. Like that passage in the book was almost like you could see it in like a movie about your life. I was like, woohoo! But here's the fabulous part and the serious part about this, and that is that this is the impact. This is the impact that people like you have had on American journalism, and it is the first draft of history, and it is why it's so important to have this diversity that so many of us have talked about for so many years, because it was that point of view. And may I remind those who are joining us, since I'm your contemporary, you were damn young when you wrote that. You were a very young woman. 1987, you were in your 20s.
Yeah, I was.
So you were in your mid-20s. So I was like, wow. I mean, that it's not only that you decided to write from the passion of what you were seeing around you, but you were also very young to be able to synthesize what you saw out there and write it and craft it in such a way that Walter Cronkite reads it and liked it. And then what you haven't told the readers is that he told you he liked it.
He did. And these are the moments where I'm like, oh my God, I wish we would have had cell phones, because I didn't have, it would have been an Instamatic camera. It would have been one of those 99-cent cameras that you bought. And I was just like, it's going to be too weird. I'm working for him. I'm a professional journalist. I can't have just done all of this as a professional and then just be like, oh, Mr. Cronkite, can we take a picture? now it would have worked, right, as a selfie and all that. But back then, so I actually, as I'm going through photographs and things, as I'm working on other things, I have a feeling like somewhere that that work that I did at CBS is going to appear in one of these boxes that I'll eventually go through.
No, it was actually really, really fantastic. So you take us through your professional journey, and you've done something that very few of us have done, and that is that you were working in all these incredible networks, and then you made the decision to go out on your own. And for that, and you really have broken ground, again, been a pioneer in that respect. But going back now to another aspect of your book, which I thought was very gutsy, especially as a journalist. We're taught that, you're not the story, and you're used to showcasing other people's pain. That's sort of one of your signature things, is you've always been able to connect that personal with what's happening around you. And in the book, you turned the tables and you did it about you, and you go into very, very, very painful territory. Everything from sexual assault to the issues with your marriage. Was that hard?
Yes. um, I just don't think that you can write a memoir where you're like half honest. And I think that for Latinas in particular, for working women, for American women, these are real issues. Like, you know, surviving a rape and not really knowing. Like, really, I think what made me want to write about that was what was happening with Christine Blasey Ford right before I started writing the book. So I was motivated by her honesty to just be like, this also happened to me when I was 16. Yeah, it does have an impact on your life, let me tell you. It does. And as we know, more women experience this than ever will talk about it. Um, you know, I think as a Latina who, again, it's weird when you call me a pioneer because I'm like, I certainly didn't feel like I didn't, it's not like, you know, like it was more just like when people say, what was that like to get your job at NPR and be the first one? I was like, I was happy to have a job. There was a recession going on. So like the secondary thing was like, holy shit, I'm the first Latina, you know, why, excuse me, but you know, wow, like that's like something like that. I I feel like it's really important for us to talk about what some of these sacrifices can look like. Mostly because I'm hoping that it spurs conversation so that we don't get to the part where, you know, almost a marriage. I mean, my husband basically is the most incredibly patient human being. But sometimes, especially in this business and trying to survive in this business and trying to survive in this business working for other people and always trying to match their expectations and, you know, jumping through the hoops and always trying to prove yourself over and over and over again, it's very taxing and very wearing. And it does pull you away from your family, psychologically, spiritually, in every possible way. And then also you say yes to everything. And so you're traveling all the time. And I think, you know, I wanted to write about ego because it's real. Now, the thing about ego that I tell my students, because I'm a professor as well right now, because I'm Mexican, I never say no to work. I just can't. So the thing about ego is that actually as women, as women of color, as Latinas, um, we need big egos. Sandra, the reason why you have excelled is because you have enough of an ego to be able to fight for yourself in the halls of one of this country's largest media companies, NBC writ large, right? It's because you know, well, I'm smart. I went to Brown. I did this. I was like, yeah, you feel the imposter syndrome, but you have enough of that sense of, I'm going to fight for myself and fight for NBC Latino to be created and to exist. So you have a mission. And I think we have to talk about that because sometimes that fighting can cost us.
Yes.
But yeah, the that particular writing, all of that stuff was not easy to do, but I felt like do it. You just do it for you and do it for other women.
What has been the reaction? I always, since I love books so much, but I've never written one myself, I always think about what happens after, right? When you're there, obviously now it's more virtual, but when folks are talking to you, when especially when young people of color approach you, it must be very, very rewarding. But what are some of the things that young people of color have picked up from your book that have either inspired them or made them feel like they're not alone?
A lot. And I got to tell you, Sandra, you know, it's very weird because you write this book and honestly, you know, you just don't know what's going to happen. It's like, bueno, I loved writing it. I know it's a good book, but igual no one feels connected to it. And so every single time, last night I was on with a book club with the Las Doctoras podcast for 2 hours with a group of PhDs, Latina PhDs, talking about what connected with them. And what connected with them was the imposter syndrome. You know, the fact that I was very public about battling imposter syndrome. What connected with them was the standing up for myself when I needed to. I think for a lot of young women, the imperfection, right, not being perfect. I'm all about I'm very clear about making sure that people don't think like you're a superhuman being or anything like that. It's like you have to talk about the imperfections. So I I feel like they are very inspired by it, and it's so hard because I'm like, what would that have been like to be reading a book like this when we were in college?
That's right.
You know, after college, I read, it was when Isabel Allende started to publish. And that was the first work that was kind of like for us that I was
Yes.
reading. Prior to that, Elena Poniatowska, which I
Yes.
mentioned, Elena Poniatowska, who is a Mexican writer. But other than that, it was really, so I can't imagine what it's like to be young and to get a book like this and to feel like, wow, maybe I can make it as a journalist. That's the best. That's
You
the
know,
best.
it's interesting, Maria, because apart from all the work you do, you're also a mentor, and not only within your own Futuro Media company and news organization, but also your work with the National Association of Hispanic Journalists and other organizations. You mentor a lot of young people. A lot of young people look up to you. Has it changed that much? Do you think there are more opportunities now for journalists of color? Do you think that there's still some of the same things, some of the same barriers? How would you sort of qualify the changes in the last few decades?
I definitely feel like there are a lot of barriers still. A lot of these institutions are still feel kind of old schoolish. But on the other hand, you have a lot of extraordinary talent. You know, the thing about being a journalist is that, I mean, and I didn't know this, right? I mean, I started doing journalism kind of ad hoc through this radio show. And then I was like, wait, this is like, there's a profession here that I feel connected to. I feel like there are a lot of young people who want to do this work, who understand the importance of journalism. You know, as a professor, what I'm trying to tell them is there's not a linear way to get to wherever it is that you want to go. And I think that's very important for us. I think in this country, especially for young people, there's a feeling like you have to do it like this. And what I'm trying to say is make your own way. Now, it's important for people to understand, and I think I get this in the book, which is I'm scared a lot of the time.
Yes.
I was scared. Like, I'm just scared, you know, but it's like, well, everybody, I mean, there are a few people in this world that are not really scared or who will never say that. But, you know, like launching Futuro Media, now we're 10 years old, like we're solid. I'm not afraid, you know, but in the early days when it was really rough, I would be like, who else is having a rough time as a media executive who is a woman of color? I'd be like, Oprah. Oprah's having a tough time. She just borrowed $500 million of people's money to launch her network. She's under pressure to deliver. And I'm like, who are you? You're not comparing yourself, but you're just saying she has other worries. You have worries. We got this. And always, to me, like one of the beauties of the book was like now that historical connection, I am tied to Frederick Douglass. He was born enslaved as a Black man and ends up then creating and running publisher, editor-in-chief of the first newspaper for Black people in the United States. That is the North Star. So I'm like, hey, if Frederick Douglass and Ida B. Wells can do this, óyeme. And that allows me to have this perspective that we need and that I'm trying to give to the young people. Own your voice, own your power. A lot of the media is still very traditional owned, and so you're going to have to fight. And when you get tired of fighting, think about doing your own thing. So it's both. I'm equally in a state of panic almost all the time about the state of the mainstream media, and also hopeful because my company Futuro represents that possibility of hope, and your work represents hope. But I'm also like terrified at the same time.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. And I was thinking that, for example, it's heartening to me to see in our newsroom at NBC News how many more young people are coming in that are, and you and I could laugh about this because we know so many young people who are blends, right? The mom was Puerto Rican, the father was whatever, that kind of thing. And there's just so many more young people in the newsroom that represent America. I mean, so many of us are either blends or come from somewhere else, or but it's just, to me, hopeful. And now the question is, as you say in your book, it's not just sort of getting to that newsroom, but will you have a voice that you can use? And one of the things that you show in the book is that you have to be persistent when it comes to being able to have that voice. You talk in the book about that amazing documentary. I mean, is that tell our fellow readers among your proudest achievements when it comes to things that you were able to put on the air and report on that you really did have to fight to get there, and how it sort of changed the way Americans see certain things.
Yeah, and I'm actually advocating to do the 10-year update of the Frontline Lost in Detention, because it was the first time that we were able to go in with cameras and see those detention camps for what they were. And they are concentration camps. They are not death camps, although, more and more people are dying there. But it is, I mean, nobody likes to use that kind of terminology, but we have to call it for what it is. That part of the book actually was something that my editor, Michelle Herrera Mulligan, she was like, you're going to have to write a lot about that.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. I was so happy, because sometimes you worry that other editors might have just been like, that's too dark. And we don't know if we really want to go that dark. I've heard so many things from so many editors, you don't know what. I wasn't surprised when Michelle said, you're going to write a lot about that. Because when you realize that it's modern America, so the detention facilities that I'm writing about, I visit them in the year 2010, basically 2010. But they had been built at, right around 2003, 2004. These are tents that you see outside of airports that usually are holding stockpiles of beans and paper towels. They're like circus tents. They don't have windows. They don't have heating or cooling because they're not meant to hold people. And this is where they were holding men and women. We had to, the stories that I heard back then, of people being fed food that was spoiled, because that's how you save money. If you're trying to make a profit, you serve spoiled food. You buy it spoiled, out of date. They were eating oatmeal with maggots. That's all they had to eat. There was a survey where they found out that everybody lost at least 10 pounds. So people are hungry. The stories of, no toilet paper, no clean underwear. I mean, just...
You have, I must admit, that part of the book, again, someone who is in the profession has read about this, but there is something searing. And in fact, some of the things I remember about the book, the one you talk about, the gentleman who was sick, I think they had given him medication. He fell off the equivalent of 4 stories from a bunk, and his eye socket exploded, his testicle exploded. That was, I had to stop for a second and thought, oh my goodness. And
he had a green card, Mamita.
Yes.
He had a green card, Jamaican. When he was 18 and he had gotten to this country in the Bronx, he was selling, drugs on the street, whatever. He got caught. He served the time, whatever it was, 18 months, and he was clean. He was now 40 years old. And they took him, and he was depressed. He was a depressed man to begin with. And then they did that they over-medicated him. The thing about it, Sandra, is that documentary comes out in 2011. I really expected, like, oh my God, finally, people, this is just, everything is going to change. And it didn't. It got worse. Yes, Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois, because of the documentary, introduced the Prison Rape Elimination Act protection for women and men in detention facilities. That just went into effect a year and a half ago or 2, because it takes years for these laws to go into effect. But basically, it's gotten worse. It hasn't gotten better. And that is the part as a journalist where you're just like, oh my God. And that's where we have to talk about the dehumanization that we are all privy to right now.
And that's why the book is so powerful, because, you know, you start with that scene where you meet a little girl in an airport, one of the children who were separated and who, you know, were going to go somewhere else with an immigration officer, not with an adult family member of her own. And yet you trace all this and you show us how, like you just said, it's just gotten worse. And in that respect, do you think that after in the last couple of years, especially after the family separations, which were, you know, headlines all around the country, I mean, do you see anything? Do you see an evolution going in a different direction, or you're not holding your breath for that?
I really want to be optimistic here, and certainly the change in administration is good news in general, because sadly, the Trump administration made it clear, we're not saying anything they didn't, that in fact the fear and pain and threats was the point of the policies. The point of taking people's children was to make them terrified, and therefore say, I'm never going to try to get into the United States. So that will change in terms of the ethos. But as you know, I've been pushing President-elect Biden on platforms like MSNBC and on our politics podcast In the Thick, to be very radical about how he approaches immigration, and actually using that word and giving him the cue, which actually I learned from incoming Congressman Jamal Bowman, who is like, what's radical is not the solutions that are being proposed. What's radical is that the problem existed in the first place. So what's radical, it's not radical to say, I'm going to halt all deportations immediately, and I'm going to shut down detention facilities immediately, and I'm going to begin immediate reunification of children with families. Why is that radical? When in fact, what is radical is that women have their uteruses taken from them because they're in a detention camp. What's radical is that they will take your children and put them into a detention camp. That's radical. What's radical is people being unprotected and being raped and assaulted physically simply because they weren't born in this country. That's radical. So it's about how we see these stories. And again, I just put it back on everybody who's watching this. It's about what you're going to do.
That's right. You know, Maria, another wonderful part about the book and the beauty of being women of a certain age is that you also have covered amazing stories in our national history. I mean, you were right there in 9/11. And you know, what was to me fun about reading the book too was sort of an evolution, like I said, like in your college days when you were denouncing some of the Reagan stuff, you know, in terms of policies with Central and South America, and then you take it all the way past 9/11. Now what we've done here with immigration. What stories are you looking forward to now? I mean, if you sort of project what you are going to do in the next few years, are there areas that you would like to tackle that you haven't tackled as much before in your prolific career?
Oh, wow. Nobody's kind of asked me like that, you know, like what is the big kind of stories or themes like in the future, because I feel like so much of where we've been in the last few years have been so dark and really just trying to kind of find a way to make it, to survive over, you know, day by day. And there's so much work to do. I mean, I'm
no,
still
COVID, right. I'm sure that all of your coverage now also has to do with, especially as our communities of color, how do we sort of, well, first of all, how do we survive it? And then how do we progress again?
right. And how, you know, how do we continue to make this visible? So, for example, you know, we continue to have food supplies as far as we know, there have not been food shortages in this country as a result of COVID, even though you can't find paper towels or Lysol, but you've been able to get the food. That's because of mostly people of color, Latinos and Latinas and immigrants who are working in the meat processing plants across the border in the fields. So how is it that they are not the first ones, or that people are not advocating for them continuously in terms of the vaccine, for example? I feel like right now, a lot of what we're having to do in journalism is, it's overwhelming, right? You know this, Sandra, you're just like, oh my God, there's so many stories. And so we have to be diligent and not give up. I oftentimes feel like I'm not doing enough as a journalist, honestly. I just really feel like, and especially now with COVID, because we've talked about this, because I had COVID early on here in New York, where we were the epicenter, and because the South Bronx was the epicenter of the epicenter, I got on the phone with a doctor who took us into the intensive care unit at Bellevue and told us, like, the majority of the people that were in that intensive care unit were Latinos. She said, oh, well, I can't give you their names, but, imagine Martinez, Rodriguez, Gonzalez, the man who was working in the deli 3 days ago, the man who you walked by who was working at the construction site, the guy who was delivering your pizza. They got sick and now they're here on ventilators and surviving in the ICU. So that story, I feel, Sandra, is one that we need to be telling in the hospital in El Paso, in the hospital in Omaha, in the hospital in, you name it. It's still happening. So I guess, let me leave this on a hopeful note. I'm looking forward to doing some work that we're doing with Futuro around reimagining the world. So I'm looking forward to and really hanging out with artists and visionaries who can take us out of the doldrums and be like, no, but imagine this. So I'm working on that, and also on forever covering Estrella's story. Estrella, as we know, is undocumented Mexican trans woman who is serving her sentence in a maximum security men's prison in Texas. So looking forward to doing her story and following up on the story of many refugees. So I'm not dropping those stories. In fact, I'm following up on the reporting that we've done, because I want to show what a policy impact looks like actually throughout the years. I'm not going to just drop these stories. I'm actually saying we got to come back to them.
That's fantastic. And quickly, I wanted to touch on something which is also a fun, hopeful note, and that is that part of the reason I really enjoyed also reading your book is that you sprinkle Español. And for those of us who speak Español como primer idioma, it was wonderful. And for those of us who don't speak it as a first language, but just enjoy Spanish or enjoy the idea of reading a book that has phrases in another language, it was wonderful and gutsy, because again, sometimes, as you know, unfortunately, even though so many of us in this nation speak another language, come from parents who speak another language, or would like to speak another language, sometimes we're made to feel like that's not appropriate. And so I thought that was wonderful. And I just want to say thank you for that. Y de parte de todos nosotros que hablamos español, te damos las gracias por haber hecho eso en tu libro. It
and to not make it italics, like the Spanish
right.
is not italicized. I was like, no, please don't italicize the Spanish.
That's absolutely right. Well, Maria, I can't tell you, it's been such a pleasure. It was really an honor to spend time with you. We don't see each other that much, especially now that I'm working from my home in New Jersey and not going into 30 Rock, where I would run into you in the hallways. It's just been an honor, and I'm so proud as a fellow Latina, fellow journalist, fellow female in this profession, which is not an easy one. I'm just so proud of your trajectory, and that you shared it. And I really recommend the book again, because it really is a book that, first of all, you make everybody feel like we can relate to you, even though you really have had such a storied career. But as a woman, as a teenager, as someone who went through really painful things, and you just made everybody feel like it's relatable. So congratulations on that. And I just wanted to say thank you for all of you who joined us. And please be sure to follow DC Public Library on social media, download the new DCPL app, or go to dclibrary.org for more virtual programming like this. Thank you for joining us and happy holidays.